How much is a used stereo worth? What is the price of a stolen rifle? For most, it's a police report, a frustrating loss. For Richard Kenneth Djerf, the answer was 4 human lives. On October 17, 2025, the state of Arizona is scheduled to execute Djerf for a crime so brutal, so disproportionate, that it defies all reason. This is not a story about who did it. Djerf confessed long ago. This is a story about the terrifying, unanswerable question of why. It's a journey into a mind where a petty theft festered for months, twisting into a meticulous plan for a massacre. It began in January 1993. Richard Djerf, a man described as a loner, discovered his apartment had been robbed. The thief, he believed, was a former friend and co-worker, Albert Luna Jr. The stolen items were typical of a small-time burglary: a cassette player, some electronics, and an AK-47 rifle. Djerf did what any citizen would do. He called the police. He reported the crime and named his suspect. And then nothing happened. For Djerf, that police inaction was not just a bureaucratic failure, it was a betrayal. The system that was supposed to deliver justice had failed him. And in that void, a seed of rage began to grow. Over the next 8 months, what started as frustration curdled into a cold, calculated obsession. The stolen property was no longer the issue. The target of his rage shifted from the man who had wronged him, Albert Luna Jr., to the family that shared his name. He began to plan his revenge, not against the thief, but against the innocent people who had the misfortune of being related to him. The imbalance was monstrous, a stolen stereo for a family's extinction. As he gathered his tools for the coming slaughter, a pistol, a knife, a baseball bat, the question was no longer if he would get his revenge, but how many people would have to die to pay for it. The path from a simple burglary to a quadruple homicide is a dark and twisted one. What turns a man from a victim into a monster? Is there a point of no return in the pursuit of revenge? Share your thoughts on this terrifying psychology in the comments. Like this video if you're ready to confront the darkness, and subscribe as we walk through the door with the flower delivery man. The doorbell rang at the Luna family home on September 14, 1993. When Patricia Luna answered, she found a man on her doorstep holding a vase of flowers, a disarming, ordinary sight. But the man was Richard Djerf, and the flowers were a lie. He pushed his way inside, revealing a handgun, and in that instant, the Luna home transformed from a sanctuary into a slaughterhouse. For the next several hours, Djerf would orchestrate a symphony of terror, a methodical and unhurried destruction of an entire family. His first victims were Patricia and her 5-year-old son, Damien. He bound the mother, letting the little boy run free for a time, a pawn in his cruel psychological game. He forced Patricia to help him gather valuables from the house, a stereo, a VCR, watches, loading the spoils of his coming victory into the family's own car. He then took them both to the kitchen, binding them to chairs with rope and electrical tape. He tormented Patricia, repeatedly asking her a question of unimaginable horror. Should she die first, or should her son? Around 3 p.m., 18-year-old Rochelle Luna came home from school. Djerf ambushed her, dragging her to her bedroom. There, he bound her to the bed, gagged her, and subjected her to a brutal sexual assault before stabbing her 4 times in the chest and slitting her throat. He then walked back to the kitchen and informed Patricia that her daughter was dead. An hour later, the father, Albert Luna Sr., arrived home from work. Djerf forced him at gunpoint to the master bedroom, handcuffed him to the bed, and beat him savagely in the head with an aluminum baseball bat, leaving him for dead. But Albert Sr. survived. Regaining consciousness, he managed to free himself and, armed only with a small pocket knife, charged his family's tormentor. In the struggle that followed, Djerf stabbed the father before finally shooting him 6 times. With Albert Sr. dead, Djerf turned his gun on Patricia and little Damien, shooting them both in the head at close range. His revenge was complete. The methodical nature of this massacre is what sets it apart. This was not a crime of passion. It was a prolonged, torturous ritual of extermination. What does this level of calculated cruelty say about the mind of a killer? Is this revenge, or is it something far darker? We need to hear your thoughts on this in the comments. Like this video if you are still with us, and subscribe to find out how a killer who took such care to terrorize his victims brought about his own downfall. A man who spends 8 months plotting a massacre, who moves through a house of horrors with the patience of a predator, does not seem like a man who would be caught easily. But Richard Djerf's criminal genius ended the moment he walked out of the Luna family's home. His undoing was not the result of a brilliant police investigation, but of his own staggering arrogance. He couldn't keep his dark secret. He had to brag. In the days following the murders, Djerf met with several friends. To them, he didn't just confess, he boasted. He recounted the details of the slaughter, describing the extermination of a family as really awesome, and telling one friend, "You should have been there." He was proud of his work. This pride would be his downfall. One of the friends, horrified by what he heard, went to the police. On September 18, 1993, just 4 days after the massacre, Richard Djerf was arrested. A search of his apartment, car, and motel room uncovered a trove of evidence, items stolen from the Luna home, and the tools he had used to commit the murders. The manhunt was over. The case against him was airtight. The stage was set for a long, complex capital murder trial. But Richard Djerf had one more shocking act to perform. In a move that stunned the court, he fired his experienced legal team. He insisted on his right to represent himself. This wasn't a plea for innocence or a fight against the system. It was the opposite. Djerf fought for the right to stand before the judge and plead guilty to all 4 counts of first-degree murder. In exchange, prosecutors agreed to drop the other charges: the sexual assault, the kidnapping, the attempted arson. He short-circuited the entire justice system, not to save his life, but to own his crime. He had been the master of his revenge, and now he would be the master of his own conviction. This is one of the most bewildering turns in any capital case. A defendant using his constitutional rights not to fight for his life, but to ensure his own condemnation. What does this act reveal about the mind of a killer? Is it a flicker of conscience, or is it the ultimate expression of a man who needs to control every part of his story, from the first act of violence to the final fall of the gavel? We need to hear your perspective on this in the comments. Like this video if this story is holding you in its grip, and subscribe to see what happens when a man who has confessed to everything faces his sentence. For Richard Djerf, the guilty plea was not an end, but the beginning of a new life. A life measured in the sterile confines of Arizona's death row. He was sentenced to die in May of 1996, scoffing at the 4 separate death sentences by saying, "They can only kill me once." Then, for nearly 30 years, he waited. The world outside changed, seasons turned, but his reality remained a concrete box. For decades, he did what condemned men do. He fought. His case wound its way through the labyrinth of the American legal system, a slow, grinding process of state and federal appeals that challenged the sentence handed down by a judge, not a jury. But by 2020, every legal door had been slammed shut. He had exhausted all of his appeals. The fight was over. On August 19, 2025, the Arizona Supreme Court issued his death warrant, setting the date for his execution. The final countdown had begun. It was in these last weeks that Richard Djerf, the man who had shown no mercy, did something that no one expected. He picked up a pen. In a handwritten letter sent to the media, Djerf announced he would not be seeking clemency. He was done fighting. He apologized for the pain he had caused and addressed the one person whose life he had destroyed but spared. Albert Luna Jr., the man whose alleged theft had been the catalyst for the massacre. No part of what I did to his family, or why, was ever his fault, Djerf wrote. Then, he offered a chilling piece of self-analysis that stands as one of the most haunting statements ever to come from death row. If I can't find reason to spare my life, what reason would anyone else have? He was volunteering for his own execution, a final, stunning act of control from a man who had controlled an entire family's final hours. This is the ultimate psychological puzzle of the Richard Djerf story. After 3 decades of fighting to live, he chose to die. Was this a final, sincere act of remorse from a man confronting the abyss? Or was it the ultimate act of a narcissist controlling the final chapter of his own dark story? This is a question that demands debate. Tell us what you believe in the comments. Like this video if you're grappling with this question, and subscribe as we enter the execution chamber. The final hours on death row are a study in silence and procedure. For 30 years, Richard Djerf's story has been one of shocking violence and legal battles. Now, it ends in a quiet room in Florence, Arizona. For the family of the Lunas, this day has been a lifetime coming. A final, somber answer to the horror that began with a knock on the door. For the state, it is the methodical closing of a file, the carrying out of a sentence. For Richard Djerf, it is a fate he has chosen. The names of his victims must be remembered. Albert Luna Sr., a father who fought back with a pocket knife to defend his home. Patricia Luna, a mother forced to endure unimaginable psychological torture. Rochelle Luna, an 18-year-old daughter whose life was just beginning. And Damien Luna, a 5-year-old boy bound to a chair. Their lives were extinguished in a prolonged, calculated ritual of extermination. For the sole survivor, Albert Luna Jr., the man whose stolen stereo was the absurd catalyst for it all. It is a nightmare he has lived with every day since coming home to find his family gone. In the end, the man who showed no mercy wrote a letter of apology. The man who fought his sentence for decades suddenly gave up, refusing to seek clemency. His final words to the world were a chilling piece of self-analysis. If I can't find reason to spare my life, what reason would anyone else have? He pleaded guilty. And now, he has consented to his own death. The man who controlled his victim's final hours now seeks to control his own. His execution is not a fight. It is an appointment he has decided to keep. This case leaves us standing on a razor's edge. There is no question of guilt. There is only the horrifying, bottomless chasm of why. The state of Arizona is about to provide its final legal answer. But does it truly answer anything? Now, we put the final question to you. When a killer confesses, pleads guilty, and volunteers for his own execution, is that the ultimate act of justice? Or is it the final narcissistic act in a monster's script? Does his death truly honor the Luna family? Or does it simply allow us to turn the page on a story of evil so profound we can never hope to understand it? This is the debate that matters. Your voice is critical. Share it in the comments below. Like this video if this story has left its mark on you, and subscribe for more investigations into the darkness that lies just beneath the surface.